Well, I suppose it's that time of year again. Huh? Wait. It's been almost 2 years since I ranked every Twisted Metal game from worst to best. Damn! Well, I guess I'm overdue for my yearly ranking of all the Twisted Metal games. Let's do this. Hey guys, what's up? Nicky once again, and today I'm going to be going over, again, ranking every Twisted Metal game from worst to best. However, the reason for why I am remaking this video is not only because my opinions on most of the games have actually changed since last time, but because I also wanted to include the PSP version of Twisted Metal Headon alongside its PS2 port. I also felt that my last ranking video was just a little bit too long and convoluted without a script ready, so I figured we could get it shortened up a little bit while still getting the main points across. If you're new to the channel, I want to remind you that my opinions expressed in this video are just that, opinions. I never have, and I never will, say that these are facts, and that if you disagree with me, that you are wrong. Also, be sure to let me know your personal list of the worst to best Twisted Metal games in the comments below. Now that we got all that out of the way, let's get into it. Starting out at number 9, we have Twisted Metal Headon, the Extra Twisted Edition for the PlayStation 2. Alright, calm down keyboard warriors and listen to me for a second. I understand why this game is beloved by so many fans of Twisted Metal. I get that it was a gateway to the series for many of you watching this video, but I cannot stress enough just how boring this game is compared to every other title on this list. And with a handheld version of the game being the superior way to play, well, you have to admit something is wrong here. Twisted Metal Headon first released on the PlayStation Portable back in March of 2005, and truthfully it was a smash hit launch title for the handheld system. We will continue back to that version of the game later in this video, but for now let's focus on the Extra Twisted Edition, which was meant to be a direct port of the same game onto the PS2 with some added bonus content to quote-unquote sweeten the deal. However, along the way, they somehow butchered everything that made the gameplay fun and exciting about the PSP version. The PS2 version of Twisted Metal Headon is riddled with countless glitches, audio bugs, broken AI that just tends to run around in circles or get stuck inside geometry so you have to go hunting around the map just to find them. They added some annoying ass beeping sound with a female robot voice reminding you every 2 seconds that your health is low whenever you're damaged, and boss battles that feel like you're playing on baby mode. Even switching to the hardest difficulty really doesn't add any extra ounce of challenge, and probably the biggest sin of them all is the fact they threw balance completely out the window with this port. Almost every weapon, even notoriously weaker ones such as homing missiles, do massive damage so that the fights, and I'm using that word very lightly, only last a couple of seconds before the opponent explodes. That's not even talking about the upgrade system. Yes, I am aware upgrades were of course in the PSP version as well, but for some reason they decided to make the upgrades even more overpowered for the Extra Twisted Edition. It truly baffles me why any programmer looked at the machine gun upgrade and said, yep, that's fair and balanced. Another major issue with the balance being this way is that it makes almost every character feel the exact same. Everyone's armor feels the same, speed, handling, etc. When every character feels the same to play, why waste my time playing through the game with every character then? Obviously, I cannot hide from the fact that all the bonus content within Extra Twisted Edition is actually really cool, and it was a dream for a Twisted Metal fan such as myself back in the day. Getting to play the unfinished levels of Twisted Metal Lost, see the lost endings of TM1, and watch that short documentary on the creation of the series was a treat to say the least. And yes, the game visually looks pretty damn good for a PS2 title. The lighting effects, the color palette, the textures, they all hold up pretty well even in 2025. But man, I'm sorry, none of that makes up for the horrendous port of the main game at hand. And that's why in my eyes, Twisted Metal Headon Extra Twisted Edition will remain at the bottom of the series until further notice. Moving on to number 8, we have Twisted Metal 1, released in 1995 for the PlayStation 1. I understand that putting the original title this low on the list is going to upset a lot of diehard fans of the series, and trust me, I understand. This Twisted Metal actually was my gateway into the series and will always hold a special place in my heart for that reason alone. However, I cannot hide from the fact that this game is heavily flawed due to its lack of polish, balance, level design, and overall amount of content. Yes, I can let a lot of those issues go because it was the game that started it all, and started the car combat craze of the late 90s to early 2000s. For that reason alone, this game will always be legendary in the eyes of many, and for very good reason. Twisted Metal can be fun in short bursts or when going against a buddy in split-screen multiplayer, but as soon as you start to notice the game's issues, those rose-colored glasses start to break. Probably the biggest issue for me when coming back to playing Twisted Metal 1 after all these years is the lack of content and overall weak level design. I understand that the original plan for the game was to have one massive open world battle, but they had to cut it down into individual levels before the final release, and sadly it really shows. Some levels are pretty decent and work well for the car combat formula such as Rooftops, Arena, and River Park Rumble, but the other maps all fall short for me in terms of flow and creativity. Ironically, I already named half of the available levels within the entire game. That's right, TM1 launched with only 6 levels, with no extra bonus levels or any unlockables, which is why I brought up the point that this game is lacking in overall content. Only 6 levels to play on, multiplayer only works on 1 of the 6 levels, no unlockable characters, and the endings are all text-based. So the game just isn't fulfilling to 100% complete like every other title in the series is. But coming back to the levels, the remaining 3 I failed to mention, Freeway Free-For-All, Assault on Suburbia, and Warehouse District Warfare, are all extremely bland in their executions and design. Suburbia is neat in its grand scale with lots of destructible elements, but after a few short minutes of driving around, you soon realize how empty the map truly is. Plus, you get lost very easily, and it's so damn huge that it's almost impossible to find opponents half the time, leading to more frustration than admiration for the technical achievements. Freeway is just boring. It's a giant loop of one road. When you get into fights with the other opponents, it's also annoying as hell being on such a narrow road where you cannot get away from the enemy or duck behind cover when it's needed. Plus, half the time the AI tends to drive in the opposite direction of the player, so it can take almost 10 minutes just to find an enemy to face them. Lastly, Warehouse District Warfare is literally just River Park Rumble without the ice rink and river in the middle, making it pretty much a useless level in my opinion. It's fine, I suppose, but when you have a better and bigger version seemingly of the same map only 2 levels later, what's the point? As for the issue with the balance, the special weapons are the weakest in the series, with more than half of them just being power missiles with different skins, and the unique ones doing little to pretty much no damage. It sort of takes away the enjoyment for using them. Ram damage is downright broken. Some characters like Warthog and Darkseid can literally ram into someone like Pit Viper or Crimson Fury and kill them instantly. It's truly insane and downright silly. As for the other shortcomings, such as freeze missiles being a weapon pickup instead of a combination of button inputs seen in every title after, half the weapon pickups being bombs or traps that you lay behind the vehicle, and the graphics not being the best to look at, I'm willing to look past all of those because again, this is the first of its kind and I have to show some respect to the OG. But sadly, just because you have the first doesn't automatically give you the win. So that's why Twisted Metal is staying at number 8. Now the next game on this list is going to be a major upset within this community and honestly even to myself. But I have to stay true to my thoughts and I have to be honest with all of you. That said, number 7 is Twisted Metal 4. I know, this is a massive shock to probably many of you because TM4, I believe I have put probably the second most amount of hours into playing over the 30 years that I have been on this earth. But with that being said, Twisted Metal 4 is far from a perfect game. Our man Pedro within the Twisted Metal Federation Discord has created some of the greatest mods I have ever experienced over the past few years. Because of these mods, it has truly ruined the vanilla version of TM4 for me. The reason for this is because they accentuate all the issues found within the original game by straight up fixing them, or adding new features and balancing the game to be an overall more enjoyable experience, even playing in 2025. And after all those different mods, I sadly cannot say that I enjoy the vanilla game anymore. Now let me be fair to the original Twisted Metal 4. Yes, I am aware that I have a bias because we have all been spoiled by these amazing mods. So for the rest of the section, I am not going to be comparing Pedro's mod of TM4 to the vanilla game. I am just going to be looking at the game objectively compared to other games in the series. Twisted Metal 4 holds a special place in my heart because growing up, it was the game I definitely put the most hours into, and that was mainly due to the vast amount of stuff you could find and mess with within the levels. Not only that, but the game is just oozing with content. 22 playable characters, 23 plus if you count Create a Car, 8 main levels, 16 if you count the bonus deathmatch maps, up to 4-player split-screen multiplayer, CGI rendered endings for all the characters, Unlockable Immortal difficulty after you complete the game 5 times in a row with a single character. And as mentioned before, you can literally create your own car for the first time in the series. Yes, of course it's very limited, but the fact it was added at all is wild. Also, Pizza Boy. I have to applaud the developers over at 989 Studios for the sheer amount of creativity seen throughout the entire game as well. From pretty much creating an all-new roster of regular vehicles to start with, massive levels with secret areas to find, tons of new weapons never seen before in the series, Rob Zombie being a playable character for the first time in the series, the list goes on. I have to agree with a lot of the critics though that just because they did something new and interesting with TM4, that doesn't mean that all these changes were for the better. I am not a fan of many of the new roster characters such as Drag Queen, Microblast, Captain Grimm, Meter Maid, and the Joneses. Thankfully, they did make some bangers though, such as Pizza Boy, Calypso with his nuke truck, Orbital, and Trash Man. I think the storyline was interesting enough to have Sweet Tooth take over the contest and Calypso having to fight in the contest that he created just to try and get his powers back was a neat touch. But that all falls apart once you start watching the ending movies because, for some reason, they made Melvin, Sweet Tooth's main henchman, do all the talking for him. It was an odd choice I always felt even as a kid, and as an adult, my thoughts have not changed on that. I wish we got to hear Sweet Tooth make the wishes, but oh well, I suppose. When it comes to the physics and control, I actually stand by that TM4 is the best feeling control within the entire PS1 era of Twist Metal games. The fact you can turn your car and boost to fly around while in mid-air was honestly genius. Also, you can't even flip over anymore like you could in TM3, so everybody wins. Also, the soundtrack, my god. TM4 is honestly one of the best in the series easily. Rob Zombie, Cypress Hill, Cirrus, Tim Skold, 1 Minute Silence, the list goes on. The shit bang. Sadly, this is where the good ends and the issues start to show their ugly head. Balance. Balance is important within any fighting game. However, there is such thing as being too balanced in my opinion, to the point where everything feels sort of the same and nothing has any impact. This is how I would describe pretty much anything within Twist Metal 4. Special weapons? No impact. Regular weapons? No impact. Machine guns? No impact. Ram damage? No impact. You get the idea. The only weapon of note that feels any sort of impact is the auto lob, but I feel like that should have just been a special weapon because it sticks out like a sore thumb. Not only do weapons do piss poor damage, but the health pools over every enemy are just enormous. So most fights take way too long to complete. On top of that, once you spend 5 minutes dwindling down the health of an enemy, they usually slip away just in time to run and get a health pickup, which brings you back to square one. 5 minutes of your time wasted. Sure, you can make the argument that you, as a player, also have an insane health pool, and the enemy's weapons don't do any more damage than yours do, so the game isn't that difficult. Which is true, but that also is not the issue. The balance of TM4 just feels like an insane amount of padding to add on extra time to the tournament. Aside from the balance issues, another main issue I've always had with Twist Metal 4 is the fact that you fight a boss on every level of the tournament. Up until this point in every Twist Metal, you would fight either one final boss at the end of the game, a middle boss such as Minion, or both. But this was the first time that they really jumped the shark in my opinion, and decided to throw a random boss battle at the end of every level. For what? More padding? To me, it always just felt like more of an annoyance than anything. It also takes away the novelty of what constitutes a boss fight, when you force the player to go against a boss character on every level. Plus, the only memorable fights throughout the entire tournament are Moonbuggy, Super Axel, and Sweet Tooth. Somehow they even butchered Minions so badly that his special misses 90% of the time, and his AI tends to run away more than he does engage with the player. It's a shame that TM4 drags on as long as it does, because I truly feel like this would be in my top 3 Twisted Metal games if it wasn't for the forced padding and constant boss fights. In the end, TM4 is still a game that I adore, and I will always show my appreciation for what 99 tried to accomplish with its ambitions and creativity. But I sadly can no longer ignore its shortcomings. So Twist Metal 4 stays at 7. Moving on to number 6, we have Twist Metal Headon for the PlayStation Portable. So when it comes to the PSP version of TM Headon, just take everything I said previously about the extra twist edition on PS2, but remove most of the negative points relating to balance, glitches, and AI, and you get this game. So yes, in my opinion, it's the definitive version of Twisted Metal Head-On, and it always will be. Of course, you're missing all the extra content and the lost levels with this version, but the overall Head-On experience is just worlds better than the PS2 variant. Graphically, it does fall short of the PS2 port, being that it's being played on a handheld system, but honestly it still holds up to this day, and it's very impressive for the time when it launched back in 2005. The AI is much more aggressive and actually serves as a challenge to the player, unlike the Extra Twisted Edition. Weapon balance is also heavily improved. Homing missiles feel like homing missiles, napalms aren't broken in terms of damage output, and the upgrades don't make you nearly as powerful, which makes the tournament feel much more like an actual challenge this time around. One issue though with the PSP variant compared to the PS2 is the control scheme being awkward due to the lack of L2 and R2 buttons on the handheld system. This creates confusion for the player when switching between this game and any other game in the series. My second issue is that the final boss, Tower Tooth, for whatever reason, is unbearably difficult on the PSP version, where on the PS2 he's a piece of cake, and can be cheesed easily with his terrible AI pathing. For some reason on the PSP, he's a god who hunts you down and makes you his bitch for 10 straight minutes. Yes, he can be defeated with enough skill and evasion, but if you die and lose all your upgrades, it honestly becomes one of the most difficult bosses in the entire series, and I do not say that lightly. Other than those two glaring issues, TM Head-On for the PSP is an enjoyable experience for any fan of the series. It even had full-blown online multiplayer when the game launched, and I remember playing matches during lunch at school, and the game ran reasonably well with minimal lag, which was insanely impressive for a handheld back in 2005. So with all that said, you might be asking yourself, why is this ranked so low if Nick seems to really enjoy this version of TM Head-On? What gives? Well, I purposely didn't really go into the details of TM Head-On when I spoke about the PS2 variant because it truthfully wasn't needed with how many glaring issues that port has. But now that we're playing the game that the devs actually intended, I can go over the reasons why I still feel Head-On is the inferior version of Twisted Metal 2. Yes, they brought back the colorful palette of TM2. The quote-unquote world tour aspect for TM2, even some of the canon lore from TM2 made a return, which was interesting to see, being that they use an entirely different design for Calypso this time around. And it's pretty clear to me that they wanted to make this the definitive Twisted Metal 3 with how Tower Tooth's head is a splitting image of the cover to TM3's Sweet Tooth. But to me, the game just feels like they were trying way too hard to recapture the glory days, so to speak, when it comes to Twisted Metal 2. It ended up making Head-On feel sort of soulless and without its own identity. Sure, the gameplay is pretty solid and it gets the job done, but everything around it just feels lifeless and stale. The level design for the most part feels lazy and uninspired. The roster is great and honestly one of the best in the entire series, but for some reason the characters all feel very alike in terms of speed, handling, and armor. This might have been on purpose due to trying to balance the online matches at the time, but it hurts the overall single player experience. The endings are fun, and they do bring back a lot of what made TM2 endings very good, but they still fall just a bit short without the edgy darkness that TM2's writing and visual storytelling fell into at times. Plus, without Mel McMurrin voicing Calypso, it just feels like it's missing something. Also, before I forget to mention them, yes, Twisted Metal Head-On introduced mini-games throughout the tournament that you could complete for extra lives, unlockable cars, and weapon pickups. These mini-games were a neat idea on paper, but for me, they just don't fit into the rest of the game at all, and putting unlockable characters behind them is just stupid and aggravating. Never do this again, please. Twisted Metal Head-On had a lot going for it, and as a portable title, it still holds up today. However, I refuse to ever consider this to be the quote-unquote true successor to Twisted Metal 2, because it falls short in so many aspects, and the game ends up just feeling like they were trying to act cool like the good old days, instead of actually being innovative and refreshing. Coming in at number 5, we have Twisted Metal 3. Twisted Metal 3 is such an enigma of a game that it's truthfully the hardest one to place on this list. Sometimes I feel like its critics aren't correct and the game is trash and belongs at the bottom, and other times I feel like it's extremely underrated and deserves a top 3 spot. Because of this, I have decided to put it smack dab in the middle, and I think that is where I will always stay within my rankings of the Twisted Metal series. TM3 was the first game created by the team over at 989 Studios after the original team at SingleTrack left Sony and moved on to make other car combat games such as Road Trip and Critical Depth. 99 Studios was given an almost impossible task of creating the next Twisted Metal right after the massive success of Twisted Metal 2. But they were not able to reuse TM2's engine, and they had to be able to ship the game within 9 months, so that eager fans could get their hands on the next installment of the series by that holiday season. Just imagine the fear in the developers' eyes when they heard all this from Sony. But that didn't stop them from creating one of my favorite childhood games of all time. It also blows my mind whenever I come back to playing TM3 and realize that the entire product, from game engine to the CGI intro and endings, new characters, and full 8-level tournament, all were created within a 9-month period. It's just insane. But I'm not going to sit here and try and force anyone who hates TM3 to believe me when I say that this game is not that bad. However, what I will say is that in my opinion, TM3 has some of the best physics, level design, pacing, and soundtrack in the entire series. No, I'm not joking. We'll start with the physics. They may not be the best for car combat game, and I agree with you. I much prefer TM4's physics or TM Black's physics over TM3's any day when it comes to Twisted Metal. However, I stand by my stance that the physics system in TM3 was revolutionary for the time, and to this day has an insanely impressive and rewarding skill gap that no other game in the series comes close to achieving. The fact that you can learn to properly do barrel rolls, flips, and evades in a Twisted Metal game is actually wild. Not only that, but the game lacks any form of shield, so you actually are forced to learn how to evade weapons and freezes in order to stay alive longer. Because of the physics mixed with a lack of shield, I would argue that TM3 could actually be one of the most difficult games in the series for new players. However, it ended up being one of the more approachable games of the series due to its slower pace, smarter AI, and decent balance of weapon spawns, damage, and accuracy. A lot of what makes TM3 such a fun game to come back to year after year for me is the pacing of the tournament. Something about it just feels like the perfect length for a car combat game. It's not too long so that it feels like TM4 with having way too much padding, and it's not too short like Twisted Metal 1 where it feels underwhelming or that it's missing content. I think a lot of that comes from the balance of the game mixed with levels that aren't too big or way too small. It's just the right size to never lose sight of your enemies. The game's soundtrack is what got me into the music that I listen to today. Rob Zombie, Pitch Shifter, and Lance Learnhardt all fit perfectly into the Twisted Metal atmosphere, and it always kept my heart racing during each playthrough. Plus, I mean, come on, how does this intro not make you want to jump in and start destroying opponents? And now, I know, I gave praise to the level design of Twisted Metal 3. I can feel the hate comments already being posted, but hear me out on this. Yes, of course, I agree, levels such as Washington DC and Egypt are straight dog water. Both maps truly felt like placeholder last-minute additions that just needed to fill space, and I'm right there with you. However, I for real cannot say anything negative when it comes to Hollywood, Hangar 18, North Pole, London, Tokyo, or the Blimp. Every level is filled with memorable details, destructible environments, and a decent flow to keep the action constant without making players feel like they are at a disadvantage. The Blimp is also an interesting level because of the first time it forced the player to think outside the box by destroying switches scattered around the entire level in order to stop the enemies from respawning in order to actually fight the final boss. It's a cool idea. Obviously, I am not blind to the fact that TM3 is not a perfect game by any means. The AI constantly running for health is downright annoying and frustrates much more than it is positive in my eyes. Yes, it's more realistic, and I love that the AI actually fight each other, unlike in TM1 and 2, but the health stealing is downright infuriating. Sadly, there isn't anything to unlock other than using cheat codes to unlock Sweet Tooth and Minion, just like in TM2. The stories, endings make little to no sense and are downright terrifying when watching in 2025, even if some of them are pretty grade A meme material. The skill gap to learn and control the physics makes the game unenjoyable for a majority of players, and they are not proper physics for a car combat game. Some weapons feel useless and do almost no damage, such as speed and rain missiles, while others just have horrible tracking that miss 90% of the time. Egypt is just ass cheeks dipped in dog water. Fuck that level. All in all, Twisted Metal 3 is a game that I both love and hate. So number 5 I feel is the right spot for it to stay until the end of time. Moving on to number 4, we have Twisted Metal released in 2012 for the PlayStation 3. Twisted Metal, or TMX as some people like to call it, was a game that was doomed to fail before it was even released. The game was being launched on a dying console that would be overshadowed in less than 12 months after this game's release. On top of that, David Jaffe and Scott Campbell, the game's lead devs, were fighting so badly that they both jumped ship only a few months after the game hit store shelves. This essentially told Sony that the game was no longer going to be looked after, and so Sony stopped funding the project and all future DLC ideas, and online support died off within the first 6 months. It was truly a tragic turn of events for anyone who was a fan of the Twisted Metal series like I was. It was even more tragic when you actually got your hands on the game and you got to see what they were cooking when it comes to the multiplayer, level of detail in the maps, the overall skill gap found within the depth of Twisted Metal 2012's gameplay. They truly had a hidden gem on their hands, but David, Scott, and Sony let it die before it could even crawl. I stand by that Twisted Metal 2012 has the absolute best gameplay in the entire series. Not only for veterans who get past the skill gap, but even for new players, the game is easy to pick up and get you right into the action. The fast-paced nature makes every fight engaging and fun, no matter if you're playing online against friends or playing through the single-player tournament mode. Graphically, it also holds up even in 2025 with an insane level of detail found within every map. The performance does take a massive shit though during larger battles because of the limitations of the PS3, but overall, it's an impressive looking game for the time. And when it comes to multiplayer, everyone who has played the game seems to agree that it is truly where the game shines, and where it should have made a bigger impact on the gaming community as a whole. I still feel to this day that if Twisted Metal would have been a launch title for the PS4, and it came with every new system sold, it could have turned into an esport for all we know. But even if it didn't go that far, I know it would have been a much bigger success, and we probably would have gotten more continued support as the years went on, with the new DLC drops including new maps, cars, etc. But sadly, that never happened, and the game bombed. Not only that, but truthfully, this game has the worst tournament mode in the entire series. Only having 3 different storylines that stretch about 5 hours of total gameplay for the single player is a massive L on the developer's part in my opinion. Now, I understand that single player was an afterthought and multiplayer was the forefront, but sadly, now that the official servers are dead, the single player is all we really have. I know that you can use programs to connect and play online today, but it's honestly a hassle, and you need a PC alongside your PS3 system in order to do it, which not many people want to deal with. The single player experience is really the only main reason this game isn't higher on the list. It's just too short, the extra and new game modes thrown in pretty much are bare bones, and the boss battles are actually terrible. Except for the first fight with Brothers Grimm, that one's fine. Fuck you, Iron Maiden. Also, I was never a fan of every vehicle being able to be driven by Sweet Tooth, Dollface, Mr. Grimm, and Preacher. It takes me out of the experience as a dedicated fan of the series, and I just hate it. Another odd choice was given every character 2 different special weapons to choose from. Some even had 3, maybe even 4, and Sweet Tooth just turns into a flying mech for God's sakes, like what the hell? Why? Say it with me. Twisted Metal should never have flying vehicles. Just cut that shit out. Jumping the shark is one thing, but they jump the fucking moon with this game. Plus, too many vehicles feel the same. Kamikaze and Crimson Fury could be the exact same vehicle with different paint jobs. Roadkill and Death Warrant, even sometimes Vermin and Meatwagon feel the same. It's just too many similarities and not enough originality between the vehicles, attributes, and the specials. Lastly, the cutscenes for the single player are just terrible. Writing, directing, budget aside, they just look like cheap MCU short films, and they should just have stuck with the TM2 comic book style endings. All in all though, the foundation of TM 2012 is just so damn solid that it pains me to see how bad it failed in the eyes of Sony and the mainstream market. It deserved better. That's why I'm placing it at 4th on this list. Now that we've made it to the top 3, I'm certain many of you are thinking to yourself, what the hell is going to be number 1? Twisted Metal 2? Black? Small Brawl? This guy has got to be insane. Well, let me put your mind at ease a little bit because my number 3 pick, I'm sorry Dave Goodrich, I love you man, but it's got to be Twisted Metal Small Brawl. I know this is sacrilege for my channel and part of me hates putting Small Brawl at number 3 and not at number 1 like I did 2 years ago. But times change and my thoughts have definitely changed since then. So, what's my reasoning as to why I put Small Brawl as my number 1 pick 2 years ago? Well, the level design, soundtrack, character roster, ending movies, balance, color palette, creative environmental weapons, the level of overall detail, tons of unlockable cars and levels, and solid gameplay all combined together to make one of my favorite experiences when jumping back into a Twisted Metal title. So then what gives? Why am I putting Small Brawl at number 3 now? Well, over the last 2 years of playing tons of Twisted Metal and getting a feel for each game and what each game has to offer, I have realized that there were issues I used to overlook for Small Brawl because I truthfully have a soft spot for the game due to its poor reception at launch and getting overlooked by Sony and critics due to its PS1 launch after Twisted Metal Black's release on the PS2. Just like Twisted Metal 2012, Small Brawl was doomed to fail. No matter how good the game was, it wouldn't matter, and that just isn't fair. But with that being said, it's clearly not a perfect game, and there are some glaring issues that keep me from calling it my favorite game in the series these days. The first major issue is performance and speed of gameplay. It runs natively around 24 frames a second, and there is no way to really overclock it, even with modern emulators, to get the game to run at 60 frames a second and actually still be playable. Obviously, that was due to limitation of the system at the time, and I totally get that. But Twisted Metal 3 and 4, which came out 4 years prior to Small Brawl, both ran at 30 plus FPS no problem, and they still look smooth as butter. Well, except for when Goggle Eyes uses a special in TM4 and completely melts your PS1. It just feels so weird to almost go back in time with performance in a Twisted Metal release almost 5 years after the previous PS1 title. But performance aside, the game overall just feels more sluggish and just slow in terms of its input delay compared to the first PS1 titles. Maybe that was by design to be easier to pick up and play for a younger generation, and if it is, I get it, but it's not for me and my playstyle. Next is the boss battles, more specifically Piecemeal. Trapper, I honestly feel, is a decent mid-boss fight. I don't like that half of the level gets cut off when he spawns, but I understand it was a quick fix to stop him from getting stuck. But it still hurts the overall fight and makes him more difficult than he needs to be. But Piecemeal is a different story. I understand the concept of wanting him to only appear for a small section after you take out each regular enemy, but man, it becomes so monotonous after having to kill not 2, not 3, but 4 enemies just to fight Piecemeal for basically a minute each time. The entire boss fight as a whole takes about 15 to 20 minutes on average, which is just ridiculous. Also, the level itself is pretty lackluster with not enough weapon pickups, so most of that extra padded time comes from running around and searching for weapons to respawn in different fight sections with Piecemeal. Overall, it's just a boring fight, which truly is a shame because Piecemeal's design is actually really neat. I like the idea of him being built from the dead vehicles you took out during the tournament. But with those issues aside, Twisted Metal Small Brawl is a great game, and it was heavily overlooked by too many people back when it was released. I am thankful that this community has grown to appreciate the game for what it is and what it set out to achieve over 20 years ago. So that's why Twisted Metal Small Brawl, I think, deserves its number 3 spot. Oh man, now we're coming down to the wire. At number 2, we have Twisted Metal 2. I promise you are not dreaming, and I promise you that David Jaffe does not have a gun to my head telling me to say all this to you. Over the past 2 years, my overall thoughts on TM2 has honestly changed for the better. No, Twisted Metal 2 is still not my favorite game in the series, but it has moved up far from being my least favorite. Does this mean that Nick actually loves TM2 now, and he takes back all that he's ever said about it in the past? Hell no! TM2 is still a fucking asshole. But he's an asshole that everyone still loves to keep around because they can bring great enjoyment in small bursts. That is how I view Twisted Metal 2. But also, I cannot hide from the fact that without it, most of what we got afterwards would not have been possible, so for that, I will always respect it. Twisted Metal 2, despite its flaws, brings a lot of greatness to the table. Amazing level design. Except Moscow and Holland, go fuck yourself. Almost the perfect roster of characters, but no Pizza Boy. A kick-ass original soundtrack. Fast and frantic gameplay that is not for the faint of heart. And beautiful comic book style animated endings that is, in my opinion, the best in the series. TM2 might kick you in the balls over and over and over, but everything surrounding it just brings you back for more. It truly makes you want to fight through the pain in order to succeed and beat the bullshit cheating AI so that you can get to the end and watch those amazing cutscenes voiced by the legend Mel McMurrin. The boss fights are bombastic and intimidating all these years later, and with some practice, they truly aren't that difficult to take down, thankfully. The only real main issue I have with TM2 is the bullshit AI, who randomly will spam attack and freeze you over and over, causing you to lose on a good tournament run just because you didn't use your shield one time. The other major issue is the physics. I know this is rich coming from a guy who praises TM3 for its physics, but I am serious. TM2 has some of the worst handling physics in the entire series, and it's not even close. It is so infuriating that almost every character feels like they're driving on ice, and if you happen to get some air, you lose all control and half the time can't even tell which direction you're going to end up when you land. It's also insane how much knockback enemies can do to your car at seemingly random intervals. You can be going 180 miles an hour straight at someone, and if you get shot from behind, it stops you right in your tracks and makes you bounce 50 feet to the right. It's moments like that where I will never be able to call TM2 my favorite game in the series, or the best game in the series. But I at least can respect it for what it accomplished all those years ago, and for bringing the Twist Metal universe truly to life. Also, I want to thank Twist Metal 2 for giving so many kids and young adults a taste of what's to come in terms of life kicking you in the balls, day in and day out, the day you turn 18. So, the time has finally come. You've made it to the part of the video where I tell you my #1 pick for the best Twist Metal game in the series. And we'll get right back to that after a word from our sponsor, Raid Shadow. Bruh. Gotcha. I don't have any sponsors, and especially not that shitty ass game. My #1 pick for the best game in the Twist Metal series is Twisted Metal Black. This probably comes at no surprise to any of you who are fans of my content, because I have said since day one that TM Black has always been my top 2 favorite Twist Metal games, if not my favorite. I just have always been terrible at choosing just one. Well, today, I'm finally saying it. Twist Metal Black is amazing. Everything from the frantically fast gameplay, to the dark, gritty atmosphere, to the gigantic and detail-rich level design, Twisted Metal Black is an experience as much as it is a video game. I love the world of Black. The mature and gritty darkness has always been where I feel TM shines the brightest. Yes, a bit of campy humor is fine to sprinkle in every now and then, such as the world of TM2. But there is just something so special about Twist Metal Black that I don't know if I'll ever be able to explain it properly. Storylines and atmosphere are one thing, but the gameplay itself is also what I love most about Black. The fast-paced action is perfect, the physics feel just right for car combat, and the level of verticality is chef's kiss. The difficulty is actually pretty fair for new and experienced players thanks to the easy, medium, and hard settings. Yes, on medium, it can be unrelenting for new players for sure. But I think once you get the hang of the physics, sense of speed, and know the level layout, medium difficulty actually is pretty well balanced. More than any other game in the series in my opinion. The AI will hunt you down and engage you so you never feel alone, but the levels are large enough so you can always get away when needed to find health or weapon and get back into the fight. The lighting effects and graphics are also gorgeous. They truly use the PS2 to its full potential to show off its new tech and using real-time lighting effects without the cost of performance. The game runs butter smooth at 60 frames a second all the way through, which is a sight to behold. Yeah, the color palette does get boring after a while, but man, when you see a bright-ass purple homing missile cutting through the grays and browns, it really stands out and truly makes the game pop. Then you have dynamic levels like the weather effects changing over time on junkyard and snowy roads, and you have prison passage that essentially is 3 stages in one. You start out in a 1v2 situation inside a squared off small room, then the doors open to a giant cruise ship which then docks into the shore of Blackfield Asylum. I have always been blown away by that level's design, even if it's not my favorite to play on during the tournament. The roster is also another plus for Twist Metal Black. The new additions are all decent in their own way, except for poor Preacher, that dude deserves so much better. And all the returning fan favorites are great, plus tons of unlockable characters to get through the game, which adds longevity. I could go on for hours on why TM Black is a wonderful game that I think anyone with a PS2 should have in their collection. But I probably should move on to a few things that I don't like because, let's face it, no game in the Twist Metal series is perfect. For one, the storylines to me are a bit too generic in terms of wanting revenge of some sort, and that tends to make a few of them blend together over time. Other than that, the endings and stories are pretty cool, and again, I prefer the darker vibes the game brings to the table. Second, the boss fights are pretty mid in my opinion. Minion is decent, with a gigantic and intimidating design, but then they ruin him with a giant shield that ends up basically being the entire fight just to destroy 4 panels around his body. After repeat plays, it just gets boring, and it's lazy design. Warhawk is a whole other can of worms. I dig the idea of a giant helicopter being a boss in Twisted Metal, and I like the nod to the game Warhawk on PS1, but this boss is beyond generic in its execution. The first time you fight him, it's actually really hard to figure out what you need to do, and you will die a lot until you figure it out. All you have to do is destroy these mini minion tankers next to the shield of Warhawk 3 times, and boom, you're good. Then you shoot him, and he's dead. That's it. Another shield is all that this boss is. Boring and lazy if you ask me. And lastly, the Dark Palette just drags on a bit too much like I stated earlier, which makes repeat playthroughs drag on compared to other titles. But that's really it for me when it comes to the gripes with Twisted Metal Black. This game is amazing, and it is my #1 pick as the best game of the Twisted Metal series. So, that's my definitive ranking of every TM game from worst to best. What do you think? Do you agree with my rankings? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comment section below what your rankings are. I can't wait to see what you all have cooking. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate all of your support. Make sure to leave a like on this video. It helps more than you know. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and we'll hopefully see you all in the next one. Peace out.